Welcome back to our Nurau Talks, where every Friday we talk about all sorts of subjects related to mental health at the workplace. It's a beautiful day, fall day in Montreal, and I have with me Dr. Jacquelyn Brady from the San Jose State University.
Hi, thank you so much for having me today.
Good. So yeah, we're so glad to have you, Jackie. And I'm going to read a little bio here. Jacquelyn Brady, she's an assistant professor of psychology in the industrial organizational area at San Jose State University in California. She earned her Ph.D. in applied industrial organizational psychology from Portland State University, where she was trained in occupational health psychology and completed a postdoc at the Oregon Healthy Workforce Center. She has numerous publications in top-tier journals and invited talks focusing on actionable strategies organizations can undertake to promote worker well-being broadly, but with a more specific focus on the interconnectedness of work and personal lives, social relationships across domains, so with family and at work, and the critical role of supervisors and organizational supports in promoting employee well-being and success across work and home life domains. So lots to talk about, lots of good intersection with what we're doing here at Nurau.
Perfect.
So Jackie, just to start us off, I know you do a lot of work with supervisor support, and at Nurau we know that training managers is so important, but I'd love to hear from you about why you think supervisor support is so crucial, and especially from the more theoretical frameworks that the literature provides for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So before I kind of describe why social support theory specifically, I want to kind of lay that foundation. And so the first thing to note is that decades of research has kind of shown the critical role of social support in predicting health and well-being. And this isn't just in the workplace, right? This is across life domains. And so what we found, meta-analytic evidence suggests that when you look at things like smoking or other things that make people's risk to cardiovascular disease higher, what we find is that social support is almost as strong of a predictor of disease and mortality, right? So having those quality social relationships can really reduce your risk factors, while having things like loneliness increase your risk factors substantially. And so social relationships are foundational in terms of our health and well-being. And so having these quality relationships across both our work and home life domains can really enhance how we're feeling on a day-to-day basis, and also in terms of long-term outcomes. And so, as you mentioned, one theory that we use to kind of understand why this is happening or how to kind of enhance well-being is social support theory. And so social support theory is great because it hypothesizes or posits that there's two different mechanisms by which social support can enhance well-being, right? So one is that it can have really direct effects on health and well-being. And another is that it can kind of negate the negative effects of stress on health and well-being. So what we know is there's a strong link between stress and obviously poor physical and psychological health outcomes long-term. And so it has these two mechanisms, right? And so social support also hypothesizes there are different kinds of support that you can receive that are critical for health and well-being. So one is emotional support, right? And so this is kind of like lending an ear or just being there to understand and provide compassion. And then there's also instrumental support. And instrumental support is all about facilitating tangible resources to someone in need. So if someone is feeling depressed, for example, giving them the resources to go get help for that, right? And so those are kind of like the two overarching types of supports. There's also different types of supports that can be categorized under them. So there's something called informational support, for example, and that would fall under instrumental support. And so without getting into too much of the weeds of that, just note that there's different types of support that can enhance well-being, right? And so why supervisors, right? So we're thinking about social support, but when you think about the workplace and you think about yourself as an employee, and if you're going through a hard time that's making it difficult for you potentially to focus on your work, right? Who better to validate your feelings and make you feel like it's okay to feel this way than your supervisor, right? So getting that kind of emotional support, for example, from your supervisor can really help you feel validated and ultimately increase your commitment to that organization and that supervisor. In terms of instrumental support, supervisors are really kind of right? That's how we talk about them in IO psychology, between instrumental resources and employees. So instrumental resources, again, are those tangible things. Within the workplace, it might be something like paid time off. Or going home early so that you can take care of your mental health, right? You're giving something to the employee, something that coworkers can't really give, right? So supervisors are in this unique position to help employees in ways that other people in the organization can't. Yeah. And so with that in mind, right, supervisors have obviously been the target of many interventions, for example.
Yeah, and I was curious to know what kind of studies, if you could talk a bit about what the benefits that studies have found, what is the research been finding on that?
Yeah, so before we started, or before scholars started kind of investigating whether you could change supervisor support or do interventions for supervisor support, we first did research on whether supervisor support enhances employee well-being, right, and important organizational outcomes. And of course, the answer is yes. Supervisor support or even bad leadership has incredible effects on employee health and well-being and their productivity at work. And so when we think about this, and we think about, okay, well, why might supervisors be having positive and negative effects on employee well-being? Like, why aren't all supervisors having positive effects on employee well-being? The reason often might be because supervisors are put in their positions, particularly because they're good at doing their jobs, right? You get promoted into a supervisor position because you're good at getting these tasks done and being really effective with them. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you have the skills to manage people right out of the gate, right? And so what the idea about the training is that if we give supervisors the tools to be better people managers, to think about the human, right, then they can enhance the well-being outcomes rather than causing these negative outcomes for employees. And so over the decades, there's been a long line of research on support for supervisor interventions. And one of the researchers that has made a huge dent in this area is Dr. Leslie Hammer. And so, oh, my mic's not working well. Sorry, I got a private message. Hold on one sec. I can change my microphone.
I think it's a little bit choppy, maybe.
Okay, try. Sound better?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So where was I? One of the researchers that has done a lot of work in this area is Dr. Leslie Hammer, right? And so I've worked with Dr. Leslie Hammer. One of her first studies on a supportive supervisor intervention trained supervisors how to be supportive of employees' work and non-work lives, right? So family support. And what we found after that intervention is that we can actually reduce things like work-family conflict, which is a stress factor that causes poor health outcomes, right? And so that was one of the first studies. And then after that, this kind of supportive supervisor training was implemented in a hospital setting and for nurses, right, and aides. And so what we found is that implementing these trainings doesn't only improve well-being outcomes, but it also enhances things like safety behaviors in the workplace. So in a hospital setting, safety behaviors are incredibly critical for patient health outcomes as well, right? So these really meaningful effects. But it also increased things like citizenship behavior. And so citizenship behavior is kind of like extra role behavior where an employee helps other employees get their work done, right? And they don't need to do that. That's not part of their job description, but it's extra role behavior. From there, we were like, well, let's see, can we actually tailor this to enhance supervisor support of very specific populations or settings, right? And so one setting was veterans, right? So veterans come into the workplace and it's kind of this ambiguous sort of situation, right? There's a lot of stigma against veterans coming into the workplace, like they probably have a lot of mental health problems and those sorts of things, those whispers that you hear in the office and just these like biases that come out against them. And so what we did is we kind of tailored the training to focus on how supervisors can support veterans in the workplace, right? And so it still had the same principles of the original training and the same kind of modules, but it kind of tailored it just a little bit. And what we found is that we can actually enhance their work well-being and their well-being, right? And so one other study building off of that was my study where we looked at whether the supportive supervisor training, the effects on well-being were constrained just to that individual employee, or in my case, I was very interested how it affected families outside of work. And so what I found specifically was that supportive supervisor training enhanced parent-child relationships and also couples relationships. And so our children, our spouse, our close others, those are the people that social support, that relationship is the most critical for our health and well-being. And so enhancing those relationships have these kind of like trickle down effects, right? Yeah.
That's amazing. That's amazing to know it's not just the individual employee that's affected, but also their family and their close relationships.
Yes, exactly. And that's, that's kind of like what I do this for, is like looking, you don't exist just at work or just at home. You're this person across these different roles. And while you might take certain role behaviors on within those roles, you're still the same human.
Yeah. For sure. And I know you talked a bit about your work on veterans, but I was wondering if you could mention a bit about your work on women after pregnancy, because last live we had Stephanie Gilbert come in and talk about pregnancy loss, and I thought it'd be a really good continuation to kind of go on to your work on women with after pregnancy.
Yeah, so I became interested. I actually started my graduate career in terms of being interested in social health psychology, which makes a lot of sense. That's what I'm talking about here, right? But I had the opportunity to work on a project and this project, one of these projects here, that focused on the role of pregnancy in the workplace and social support in the workplace and postpartum health outcomes, right? And so this was the opportunity where I was, wow, this kind of research isn't just looking at the things that I love to understand, social health, but it also can make a difference in people's lives, right? So we can think about, like I said, or like you said, those actionable strategies that can enhance employees' lives. And so I worked on that project with one of my colleagues, and what we found essentially was that support in the workplace predicts, so support during pregnancy predicts postpartum outcomes like healing from birth quicker, right? Postpartum depression. And so when you think about this and relate it to the social support research from decades ago by Cohen, he found that social support can actually reduce your susceptibility to common cold. So here is a physical manifestations in the workplace of that social support and what it does for postpartum women.
Wow. And so just to kind of end our live on a very practical note then, what would you say to workplaces in terms of looking at supervisor support, how they can better train their supervisors? What would be considered a good actionable step for them in terms of getting good training for their managers? How do they choose a good training and help best support their managers in that aspect?
Yeah, I think that the most important thing is that you need to understand as an organization that you can't consider productivity or these other organizational outcomes without considering the human first. If you take care of the human, then you're going to have those better organizational outcomes, right? So when you're looking for a training, I would say focus on the trainings that teach supervisors how to better help the employees, right? Whether that's to meet their work goals, to support them across their life domains, or whatever, as long as it's focused on how do we support our employees. Along those lines, I can provide a link at some point, maybe in response to the live a little later. I talked a little bit about Dr. Cameron's research. There are some free resources available that organizations can kind of look at that builds off some of the training research that we've done. Okay. Oh, since my microphone still has a problem.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
So sorry.
No worries. I mean, I got the majority of what you said, Jackie, about how we need to focus on the human instead of just on productivity and finding a training that best supports and helps employees. So I think that's a great note to end off on, and just an encouragement to workplaces, if you're a manager, if you're an employee, to really go read what Jackie has been doing and to invest in some good training for your managers. And that's what we're doing here at Nurau as well. So really fun to meet other people who are on that same page as well. So with that, I'd
Thank
like
you
to end
so
our
much.
live and wish you guys, yeah, a wonderful weekend. And thank you, Dr. Brady. Sorry for being with us today.
Thank you so much. I appreciated it.